When my brother slid the folder across the kitchen table and told me to sign, I didn't even pick it up. I just looked at him. And that was when my sister-in-law leaned forward and said, very quietly, "You don't actually have a choice here, Renee. My name is Renee O'Coffer. I'm 31 years old. I work as a forensic auditor for a mid-sized firm in Ottawa, which means I spend my days untangling other people's financial disasters. Fraudulent invoices, misappropriated funds, numbers that don't quite add up the way someone hoped they would. I'm good at my job. I'm patient. I notice things. I'm telling you all of this because it matters. It matters that I know how money moves. It matters that I know what paper trails look like and what they look like when someone's tried to erase them. It matters because when my grandfather died and left me the house in Westboro, I already knew, before anyone said a word at the reading, that something wasn't right. My grandfather, everyone called him Papa Gus, died in January. He was 84, sharp as a tack until the last 6 months, and he had spent 50 years building a quiet, dignified life in that house on Balsam Avenue. 3 bedrooms, a wraparound porch, a backyard maple that had to be at least as old as the house itself. In Ottawa's current market, the property was assessed at just over $1.1 million. Not a fortune, but not nothing either. Papa Gus had 2 children, my mother and my uncle. My uncle had 2 kids, my cousins. My mother had me. My father left when I was 9 and was never really part of anything after that. Papa Gus and I were close in a way that surprised people who didn't know us. I used to drive out to Westboro every other Sunday, and we'd sit in his kitchen and eat whatever he'd been making that week. Pierogies, tourtière, sometimes just deli sandwiches, and we'd talk about his life in Sudbury before he moved south, about my work, about what it meant to do something honestly. He used to say, "Renee, a clean ledger is the most important thing a person can have." I thought he meant professionally. I understand now he meant something bigger. He updated his will 8 months before he died. I didn't know. My mother didn't know. My uncle found out, though, because Papa Gus had told him he was meeting with his estate lawyer, and my uncle had made it his business to find out why. What Papa Gus did was this. He left the house to me outright. He left my uncle a lump sum from his savings. $60,000, which was not nothing, which was in fact entirely fair given that my uncle had never helped with anything, had not visited more than twice in 5 years, and had already received financial help from Papa Gus when he was going through his own difficulties in his 50s. He left my mother a smaller amount and some personal effects she had told him she wanted. He left my cousins nothing, which is its own story I'll get to. The reading was in early February, a Tuesday afternoon at the estate lawyer's office on Spark Street. My mother was there. My uncle was there. My aunt. My 2 cousins, who I hadn't seen in 4 years. And my brother, which was strange, because my brother is my mother's son from her second marriage, and he had met Papa Gus maybe a handful of times, but there he was, sitting in the back row of the office like he had any business being there at all. My uncle's face, when the lawyer read out the property clause, did something I don't think I'll ever forget. It didn't crumple. It didn't get red. It went very, very still, like the moment just before something breaks. He said, "There must be an error." The lawyer, whose name is Mr. Brott, Fontaine, looked at him over his reading glasses and said, "There is no error." And that was the beginning. The calls started that evening, my mother first, which surprised me because I thought she understood the will. She was crying, which is my mother's first tool in any situation. She said Papa Gus must not have been in his right mind when he changed the will. She said it wasn't fair that I got the house when she was his daughter. I reminded her gently that she had received exactly what she told him she wanted, and that the house had been mine to visit and care for far more than anyone else's over the past decade. She said I was being cold. She hung up. Then my uncle called. He did not cry. He talked for 22 minutes in a very measured, controlled voice about legacy and family and what Papa Gus would have truly wanted if he had been thinking clearly. He used the phrase diminished capacity 3 times. I asked him if he was suggesting we contest the will. He said he was simply raising concerns. I said I understood, and I ended the call. Then my cousin, the older one, the one who has never had a stable job and who borrowed money from Papa Gus in 2019 and never paid it back, sent me a text that said simply, "This isn't over." I screenshotted it. I screenshot everything. The next 6 weeks were exhausting in a specific way that people who haven't been through family estate disputes might not understand. It wasn't dramatic every day. Mostly it was low-grade, persistent pressure. My mother would call and cry. My uncle would send emails, careful, lawyerly-sounding emails, about how he felt the process had been rushed and how surely we could come to an arrangement. My aunt sent a card, an actual physical card in the mail, that talked about honoring the spirit of family. My brother, who I should mention had clearly been recruited as some kind of intermediary, kept texting me variations of "Can we just talk?" I went to see Mr. Fontaine on my own. I asked him to walk me through every step of the process by which the will had been updated. He did. He had known Papa Gus for 11 years. He told me, with the particular directness that good estate lawyers have, that my grandfather had been completely lucid, had come to him independently, had provided clear instructions, and had signed everything without hesitation. He also told me that my grandfather had left a letter, not part of the will, a personal letter to be given to me at his discretion once things settled. He gave it to me that afternoon. I read it in my car in the parking garage on Queen Street, and I cried for 40 minutes. I'm not going to read the whole letter to you. It's mine, but I'll tell you the part that matters. Papa Gus said he knew what was going to happen. He said he knew my uncle and his family would push back. He said he chose me because I was the only one who had ever shown up, not for the property, not for what it was worth, but for him. He said the house was his legacy, and he wanted it to go somewhere it would be kept and loved. He said he was sorry I would have to deal with the noise. He was right about the noise. In late March, my uncle filed a formal notice of objection with the Ontario court, claiming undue influence and testamentary incapacity. I hired my own lawyer, a woman named, well, I'll just call her my lawyer, who specializes in contested estates. She was expensive and worth every dollar. She told me upfront, "This is winnable. It's also going to take time and it's going to be unpleasant. Are you prepared for that?" I said yes. What I didn't anticipate was the family meeting. My mother called it. She said she wanted everyone to sit down like adults and see if we could resolve things without the courts dragging everything out. She said she just wanted peace. She has always been very skilled at framing her own agenda as peace. The meeting was at my aunt and uncle's house in Kanata on a Saturday in April. I almost didn't go. My lawyer told me not to. She said nothing good would come from it. I said I was going anyway because I wanted to look my family in the face and say what needed to be said. She made me promise to record the conversation, which in Ontario is legal, as long as one party to the conversation consents, and I was a party. I drove out to Kanata on a gray April morning with my phone in my jacket pocket, recording app already running. There were 8 of them in the living room. My uncle, my aunt, my 2 cousins, my mother, my brother's wife, who I had met maybe twice, and someone I didn't recognize at first, a man in a blazer sitting near the window who my uncle introduced as a family friend with some financial expertise. I later confirmed he was not a licensed lawyer or financial advisor. He was my cousin's former roommate who had done some real estate courses. I sat down. I accepted the tea my aunt offered because refusing felt aggressive, and I was choosing my battles. I waited. My uncle began. He had notes. He talked about the family home as a shared legacy, about how it had belonged to their parents, about how it was the site of family history and memory. He talked about fairness and proportion. He talked about my work as an auditor as if it were somehow evidence that I didn't need the house. as if professional competence translated into not deserving your grandfather's gift. My mother cried on schedule around the 15-minute mark. My cousin, the older one, leaned forward at some point and said, very directly, "You know this is wrong. You know Papa Gus wasn't thinking straight, and we're giving you the chance to fix it before a judge does." I said, "That's not what will happen." He said, "We'll see." My brother slid the folder across the table. Inside was a document. I won't call it a legal document because it wasn't. That proposed I transfer ownership of the Westboro property to a family trust managed by my uncle in exchange for a cash payment of $220,000. $220,000 for a $1.1 million property, a fifth of its value. I looked at the numbers for a moment. The auditor part of my brain kicked on automatically, and I thought, they think I'm going to take this. I set the folder back down without picking it up. My sister-in-law said, "You don't actually have a choice here, Renee." The room went quiet. I looked at her. I want to be specific about how I felt in that moment, because I've tried to explain it to people since and it comes out wrong. It wasn't anger, it was something colder, something clarifying. Like when you've been working on a set of financial records for weeks and suddenly one number clicks into place and the whole picture becomes obvious. It was that. I said, "I'd like to understand what you mean by that." She glanced at my uncle and then back at me. She said, "We mean that a court case is expensive and long and hard on everyone, including you, and that you should think carefully about what fighting this is going to cost you." I said, "I appreciate the concern." She started to say something else, and I said, "I'm not finished." That was the moment the room shifted. I don't know how to describe it exactly, except that when I said I wasn't finished, something in my voice, not loud, not aggressive, just absolutely certain, made everyone stop. I said that I had met with Mr. Fontaine. I said that I had reviewed every document related to the estate in detail. I said that my grandfather had been assessed by his physician 6 months before his death and had been found fully cognitively competent. I said I had that physician's notes. I said that Mr. Fontaine had 17 years of professional relationship with my grandfather and would testify without hesitation to his state of mind. I said that I had a letter in my grandfather's handwriting that spoke directly to his intentions. I also said, and this is the part I had been saving, that I had reviewed the financial records from my grandfather's bank account over the past 5 years. Because I am an auditor, because that is what I do. And I had noticed that in 2021, my uncle had been added as a co-signer on one of my grandfather's accounts, ostensibly to help manage his finances as he aged. A reasonable thing in principle, except that between 2021 and 2023, there had been a series of transfers from that account, small enough individually to avoid immediate scrutiny, large enough collectively to matter, totaling $43,000 moved into accounts I did not recognize. The room was not just quiet. It was airless. I said I had documented all of it. I said I had already shared the documentation with my lawyer. I said that if the estate contest proceeded, this information would become part of the discovery process, and at that point it would be very much out of my hands. My uncle said, "Those transfers were authorized." I said, "Then you'll have no trouble producing the documentation." His financial expert friend stood up and said something about context being important, and I looked at him and said, "I'm sorry, I don't believe you're a party to this conversation." And he sat back down. My mother had stopped crying. She was looking at my uncle in a way I had never seen before. My brother started to say something. I don't even remember what it was. I stood up. I thanked my aunt for the tea, and I said that I would be keeping the house. I said that if my uncle wished to proceed with the estate contest, I would see him in court, and I was confident in the outcome. I said that if he wished to discuss the financial irregularities separately, my lawyer's contact information was available. I said I hoped everyone had a good rest of their Saturday, and I walked out. I drove back to my apartment in Centretown and I sat in my kitchen for a long time without turning on any lights. I wasn't triumphant. I wasn't relieved. I was tired in the deep way that happens when you've been holding yourself together very carefully for a very long time and you've finally been able to set it down. My uncle withdrew the estate contest 3 weeks later. His lawyer sent a letter to my lawyer. No explanation, no acknowledgement, just a formal withdrawal. My lawyer called me and said, "Well, that's done," in the tone of someone who had expected this but was still glad to see it. I sat with the news for a minute and then I said, "What about the financial issue?" She said that was my call entirely. I thought about it for a long time. I thought about Papa Gus and his kitchen and his pierogies and his idea of a clean ledger. I thought about what he would have wanted. He knew about the transfers. I believe that now. I think he was too proud to confront it directly and too tired and maybe too hopeful that people could be better than they are. He left the house to me in part because he knew that I would find it. He knew I would know what to do with what I found. I did not go to the police. Not because it wasn't serious, it was, but because I made a different calculation. I sent my uncle a certified letter through my lawyer that said very plainly the documentation exists. I have retained it, and I will revisit the question of what to do with it at any time if the circumstances warrant. It was not a threat. It was a fact. I haven't heard from him since. My cousins have gone quiet. My brother sent me a text 3 months later that just said, "I'm sorry," which I read and didn't respond to, not because I didn't accept the apology, but because I wasn't sure what to say to someone who had sat across that table with that folder. My mother and I are finding our way back to something. It's slow. She came to Ottawa in June and we had coffee, just the two of us, and she said she hadn't understood what was happening until that day in Kanata. She said she should have believed me earlier. I told her I understood. I'm not sure I fully forgive her yet, but I'm not sure forgiveness is the right frame. We're working on it. I moved into the house on Balsam Avenue in August. The first thing I did was sit on the porch with a cup of coffee and look at the maple tree in the backyard. It's enormous up close. You don't really understand the size of it until you're sitting right under it. Papa Gus used to say it would outlast all of us, and he was probably right. I've repainted the kitchen. I fixed the leak in the upstairs bathroom that he'd been meaning to get to for 2 years. I bought a new kettle because his old one was held together by something I can only describe as faith. I've had 2 friends over for dinner. I'm learning, slowly, what it means to be somewhere that is actually entirely mine. There's something Papa Gus said to me once that I keep coming back to. We were talking about my work, about the cases where people had cooked the books for years before anyone caught on, and I asked him how they lived with it, how you went about your days knowing what you'd done. He thought about it for a minute and then he said, "I think most people are very good at believing what's convenient." He was right. The people who sat across that table from me that day in Canada were not mostly evil people. They were people who had decided it was convenient to believe they deserved something they didn't. They had told themselves a story about family and fairness and legacy, and they had told it so many times that they had mistaken it for the truth. I have my grandfather's house. I have the letter he wrote me. I have the maple tree in the backyard. And I have a very clean ledger. That's enough. That's more than enough.